When we get our groceries and eat our food, most do not understand the underlying atrocities associated with the work that goes into producing it. The abuse in the agricultural industry makes a burden of life for those producing essential labor in the United States, and this must change. In this speech, I'll discuss the terrible situations migrant farm workers find themselves in, why these workers are limited in their pursuit for better working conditions, as well as what we should do to ensure that they do not have to suffer to produce an essential service. Farmhands in the U.S. experience terrible conditions. Their health and their safety are at risk, and they aren't adequately compensated or cared for by their employers. Of the myriad of issues migrant farm workers face, housing is paramount in urgency. There are many reasons why immigrants coming to America work on farms, and they are subject to unjustifiable living conditions. Tantamount to the myriads of reasons, such as a lack of options, lack of relegation, and a lack of inspection, is the monopoly that landowners often have. That owners of the farms are required to provide housing for the migrant farm workers. However, the conditions of the housing are very often loosely and rarely inspected. This couples the fact that the landowners can set their own prices for the substandard housing. Often, migrant workers are overcharged on low-quality housing because they do not have another option. The National Farm Worker Ministry details this, saying, "Farm workers commonly face substandard housing conditions. Many workers pay high prices to live in crowded, unsanitary conditions, which often lack basic utilities. They also often live in isolated areas far away from vital services such as health clinics, grocery stores, and public transportation." This comes from the National Farm Workers Ministry. Immigrant agricultural laborers are 73% of all farmhands. And this is because the United States knows this essential service is crucial. The agricultural industry is subsidized by our government, and immigrant labor means owners do not have to pay as much for their workers. For the workers, this means they're paid poorly for difficult and tiring labor. Daniel Costa from the Economic Policy Institute explains the poor wages that workers receive. He says, the latest wage data show that farm workers were not rewarded adequately during the pandemic. They earned just $14.62 an hour on average in 2020, far less than some of the lowest paid workers in the United States. This comes from Costa for the EPI, the Economic Policy Institute. Migrant farm workers are subject to these harsh conditions largely due to their vulnerability being undocumented or just simply immigrants. Many farmhands are undocumented and therefore experience unjust labor practices. These workers do not have alternate options to work. As stated by the American Farm Bureau Federation, in total, U.S. agriculture needs 1.5 to 2 million hired workers each year. This comes from Forward. Farmers have had trouble finding enough workers, so they tend to go to those most desperate and willing to work. Farm work is challenging, and the workers often are not paid enough, regardless of government subsidies for the farmers. Due to immigration status, there have been many horror stories regarding the owner's abuse towards their workers. Workers have been threatened with deportation for things as simple as taking too long of a water break. The fear of being sent back to their initial countries keeps these workers stuck working for their owners. They don't have another option. Some owners have even threatened deportation for migrant workers who do want to no longer work on the farms. Many workers are in the U.S. on work visas specifically for agriculture. This means they do not have a choice for alternate employment regardless of any abuses that they may face. And you may be asking yourself, what could be done to change these conditions? To fix these issues, we must take a stand against politicians who ignore it. We must also hold the owners of certain agricultural industries accountable. Furthermore, it is necessary to create an easy path to citizenship for these laborers and for their families. For as important as agriculture is in this country, politicians invoke their own political ideology opposed to what would benefit the industry. The GOP has introduced bills to force farmers to check the status of immigrants before hiring them. The Democratic Party has not thoroughly advocated for the better conditions of migrant workers either. This seems like a problem that is largely ignored, and it's unacceptable. The individual solution to this, you or me, it must be a group effort to call out the agricultural industries as well as the politicians. Politicians adhere to their lobbyists and their constituents, which is us. The constituents largely care about the matters directed to them by corporate media. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, anything. The term wedge issues comes to mind. Simply, if we do not care about this, then we can't expect them to. There needs to be more public outrage and awareness to what I've discussed here today, and that's part of why I'm discussing it. Farm workers who are undocumented must be given a path to citizenship. This would benefit the workers, the agricultural industry, and the economy as a whole. As FWD states, the CBO has found that providing legal status to current undocumented workers would have a net positive effect on the federal budget, increasing tax revenues. The CBO has also found that legalizing the undocumented population would boost economic output and increase the employment for U.S.-born workers. Additionally, stabilizing the workforce would help U.S. farmers stay open for business, keeping jobs available for U.S. workers and pushing back on increasing food and production costs driven by the shortages. I know I felt it when you go to the grocery store, and I know you felt it. These increasing prices, this is one of the elements why we have to deal with this. Today I discussed the substandard conditions farmhands are exposed to, the undocumented immigrant workers and why they are taken advantage of, and what we can do to direct change. This issue should be important to all of us. We complain about the prices in the grocery store, but we don't think about the work that goes into putting food on our tables. The migrant workers are tremendously tough and brave arduous conditions for the good of the U.S. and the good of us. We must reciprocate their labor with advocating for proper treatment of these workers. That's the only way we can do it. Thank you.